I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are facing a completely impossible situation.
Yeah, like a total wall.
Right, exactly. It could be, a massive project at work that's just falling apart, or a personal hurdle that seems totally insurmountable. Whatever it is, the walls are closing in.
And everything you've tried so far has just failed spectacularly.
Spectacularly. The standard playbook, it's useless. The only way you're going to survive, let alone win, is to take that existing rulebook, tear it to shreds, and just start completely over from scratch.
It's terrifying.
It's a terrifying thought, right? Letting go of literally everything you know. But today, we're going to look at exactly how that kind of radical reset actually works. Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating mission ahead of us today for you.
We really do. We're going to be exploring a moment in history where a devastating, almost empire-ending defeat forced an entire massive organization to radically innovate its tactics.
And by doing so, they managed to shift the entire balance of a global conflict.
It's wild.
It really is. Today's source material is a comprehensive historical overview from Wikipedia of the Second Battle of the Piave River.
Also known as the Battle of the Solstice.
Yes, exactly. And it took place in June of 1918. But to really understand the stakes here, I need to set the stage for you. So by late 1917, World War I had been raging for years. And Russia had just exited the war following the October Revolution.
Which is a massive, massive geopolitical shift.
Huge, because it meant the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Germany could suddenly take all those massive resources, all those troops they were using in the East, and funnel them directly onto the Italian front.
It was just an overwhelming influx of manpower and pressure. The Italians had largely been fighting the Central Powers alone up to this point.
Right.
And this sudden massive shift in enemy resources led directly to a crushing disaster for Italy in the autumn of 1917 at the Battle of Caporetto.
Yeah, and crushing almost feels like an understatement when you look at the source. The Italian forces were completely routed. They were forced to fall back and make a desperate, literal, last-stand defensive line along the Piave River.
The stakes could not have been higher for them.
No. The Central Powers were threatening major, culturally and strategically vital Italian cities. We're talking about Venice and Verona being directly under threat.
Right on their doorstep.
Exactly. If that Piave River line breaks, Italy might be forced into an armistice, and the entire outcome of World War I could look very different.
And this is where we get to look at two completely different approaches to leadership and problem solving under extreme pressure.
Yeah.
On one side, you have the Austro-Hungarians, who are dealing with some intense internal dysfunction at the absolute worst possible time.
Oh, yeah.
And on the other, an Italian command structure that essentially has to reinvent itself overnight.
Okay, let's unpack this Austro-Hungarian dysfunction because it really reads like a masterclass in how not to run an organization.
It really does.
So they have this new chief of staff, Arthur Arts von Strassenberg, and he wants to finish the Italians off once and for all. But there's a bitter, intense rivalry between his two top army group commanders.
Classic office politics, but with armies.
Exactly. You've got Konrad von Holzendorf, who is actually the former chief of staff, and Svetozar Borovich. And they completely disagree on how to attack.
Total opposites.
Right. Konrad wants to attack from the South Tyrolean Alps, pushing towards the Asiago Plateau and Vicenza. Borovich, on the other hand, wants a frontal attack straight along the Piave River.
And Strassenberg himself actually favors a third option entirely.
Yes. On the western part of the front toward Brescia. It's just a mess of conflicting egos.
What's fascinating here is the fatal compromise that Emperor Karl and Chief of Staff Strassenberg came up with.
Oh, this part is crazy.
Because they were entirely unable to decide between these strong personalities and, frankly, unable to manage the egos of Konrad and Borovich, they chose the absolute worst strategic option available to them.
Wow.
They simply split the army in half.
Wait, let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly for everyone. They take this massive advantage they just gained from the Russian exit, and instead of using it to punch a hole through the Italian lines, they just cut their own strength down the middle.
Yep.
Doesn't that guarantee neither commander has enough firepower to actually break through?
It absolutely does.
Oh.
They gave half to Konrad, half to Borovich, and held back a tiny fraction for a diversionary action.
Wow.
In military strategy, or honestly, in any strategic endeavor you might face in your own life, this violates a core fundamental principle. They diluted their main force.
Yeah.
Instead of a concentrated, overwhelming strike, They divided their power simply to avoid hurting anyone's feelings at headquarters.
It's staggering that this level of appeasement dictated a global war. And they're modeling this attack on the German tactics used on the Western Front, right? Preparing an all-out frontal assault.
Exactly.
But let's look at the Italian side, because the contrast is incredible. After the disaster at Caporetto, the Italian commander, General Luigi Cadorna, is dismissed. Yeah, he's out. General Armando Diaz is brought in to replace him as chief of staff, and Diaz immediately conducts this brutal, honest postmortem of why they failed so miserably.
Which takes guts.
It does. But what does he actually do with that information? Like, how do you fix an army that's just been completely routed and is literally backed up against a river?
Well, he doesn't just blame the troops or make excuses, which is a common trap for new leadership.
True.
Diaz and his staff look at the data and conclude that their rigid defensive schemes were a literal death trap. Up to that point, they relied on what's called continuous entrenchment.
Okay, what's that?
Think of it like a rigid brick wall. If the enemy hits that brick wall hard enough in one specific spot and it cracks, the structural integrity of the entire wall is compromised.
Oh, I see.
The Italian units lacked mobility. The command and control system was far too centralized, meaning frontline decisions had to go all the way up the chain of command while people were actively under fire.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. And they had packed way too many soldiers right on that front line with no depth behind them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Diaz takes that analysis and completely revolutionizes how his army operates. But he has to do this while the enemy is actively breathing down his neck.
Right, there's no timeout.
So he abolishes that traditional continuous entrenchment. How does he replace the brick wall?
He replaces it with a flexible net. He develops a highly mobile defense system. Instead of locking everyone into one long trench, he empowers small units to freely move between recognized strong points.
So they can actually adapt.
Exactly. These small units can now independently decide to retreat if they're overwhelmed, or counterattack if they see an opening. They can even directly call in artillery support without waiting for approval from top brass.
And he didn't just stop at giving them permission to move, right? He actually gave them the infrastructure to do it. The source mentions he built this massive centralized reserve force. 13 divisions equipped with 6,000 trucks, ready to deploy anywhere they were needed at a moment's notice.
That's right. It's a masterclass in human psychology under pressure. He realized that micromanaging from the top down was getting people killed. So he essentially decentralized his entire command.
Yeah.
He gave the people closest to the problem, the soldiers actually taking fire, the autonomy to solve it. He backed them up with that highly mobile reserve of trucks. He recognized that rigidity was their greatest weakness and flexibility would be their greatest strength.
That flexibility was tested almost immediately. Let's set the scene. It's the night of June 15th, 1918. Diaz gets intelligence revealing the exact timing of the Austro-Hungarian attack. He learns they're planning to launch their massive offensive at 3:00 a.m.
So he knows it's coming.
He knows it's coming. So what does Diaz do? He doesn't sit back and wait for the blow to land. At exactly 2:30 a.m., half an hour before the enemy assault, the Italian artillery opens up a massive preemptive barrage all along the front line.
Just dropping shells right onto the crowded enemy trenches.
Exactly.
The psychological and tactical chaos this caused cannot be overstated. You have Austro-Hungarian troops who are geared up, adrenaline pumping, waiting for their 3 p.m. start time, and suddenly the world explodes around them.
Half an hour early.
The source details how this completely fractured their coordination. In some sectors, Austro-Hungarian soldiers actually retreated back to their own defensive positions because they thought they were the ones being attacked.
Wow.
In other sectors, they blindly pushed forward directly into the artillery fire. The precise, synchronized attack they had planned for months was shattered before it even began.
But despite the absolute chaos, Borovich does manage to launch his assault along the Piave River. And initially, it looks like his half of the plan might actually succeed.
It does.
His forces cross the river, and they carve out a significant footprint on the Italian side. We're talking about a bridgehead that's 15 miles wide and 5 miles deep, and they achieved this under incredibly heavy Italian resistance.
But remember that new flexible net defense Diaz set up.
It bends, but it doesn't break.
Exactly. And then the Italian artillery does something devastating. They don't just shoot at the troops. They focus their fire on the river itself and destroy the bridges behind the Austro-Hungarian soldiers.
Oh, man.
It was a tactical masterstroke that turned a localized success into a deadly trap. The Austro-Hungarian troops, who had fought so hard to cross the river, were suddenly completely cut off from reinforcements and supplies.
Nowhere to go.
And to make matters worse, the geography turned against them. The Piave River had swollen. It isolated a huge number of units on the west bank, making them sitting ducks for Italian fire. A massive number of Austro-Hungarian soldiers drowned, just trying to swim back to the east bank in retreat.
I think to really ground this in reality for you, we have to remember that we're talking about human beings in an unimaginable situation, not just pins on a map.
Yeah, real people.
Our source includes a really visceral first-hand account from a Japanese writer named Harukichi Shimoi, who is actually there on the ground. He wrote, "Thick bursts all around me, very close.
Right there in the action.
I saw many who died and who were wounded. I will never forget those 2 days. A young soldier fell wounded. A piece of shrapnel had entered his right leg, another under the right eye, and another in the right ear."
It just strips away all the sterile talk of tactics and strategy.
Yeah, it really brings it home.
The abstract decisions made in grand palaces, like splitting an army just to satisfy a general's ego, translate directly into that kind of terrifying, chaotic reality on the muddy banks of the Piave.
While Borojevic troops are trapped against that flooded river, let's shift our focus to the other half of that divided Austro-Hungarian army. Remember Konrad von Hötzendorf?
The other general.
On that exact same day, June 15th, he launches his half of the offensive against the Italian, lines up on the Asiago Plateau, aiming for Vicenza. He's attacking mountainous areas like Mount Zavetto, Mount Lamerle, and the Three Mounts. But the resistance he runs into is fierce.
Yes, the Italian frontline troops were deeply entrenched in that rocky terrain, and the source notes a really intriguing geographical detail about Mount Zavetto specifically.
Oh, right, the tunnels.
Yes, it hosted both Italian and Scottish positions, and they were actually connected by a complex network of underground tunnels.
That is wild to think about.
If you try to visualize fighting in that kind of environment, navigating dark, subterranean mountain tunnels while artillery shakes the rock above you, it's harrowing. It also highlights how multinational this defense had become, even though the French and British reinforcements were just a fraction of the total force.
Conrad's forces are taking horrific casualties, just repeatedly slamming against these fortified, tunneled mountain positions. They eventually add 40,000 casualties to the Austro-Hungarian total just in this sector alone.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can start to see the fatal flaw of that earlier compromise completely unraveled. Down on the river, Borojevic realizes his front is collapsing.
Because his bridges are gone.
His bridges are gone, his men are trapped against the swollen water, and he desperately begs headquarters for reinforcements. But Konrad, who completely failed in his initial attack on the plateau, stubbornly refuses to stop.
He just won't give up.
No. Instead of recognizing reality and sending his remaining forces down to help Borojevic salvage the Piave sector, Konrad wastes his diminished strength continuing these pointless, failed assaults on the mountains.
It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy playing out with human lives. He just couldn't let it go. By June 20th, the situation is completely untenable across the board. Emperor Karl has to step in, take personal command, and officially order a full retreat.
Finally.
Yeah. By June 23rd, the Italians have recaptured every single inch of lost territory on the southern bank of the Piave. The battle is over, but the casualties are just staggering. The Austro-Hungarian Empire suffered over 118,000 casualties. Italy suffered over 87,000.
The sheer scale of the loss is difficult to comprehend, and in the immediate aftermath of this massive defensive victory, Diaz faced a brand new challenge. But this time, it wasn't from the enemy. It was from his own allies.
So, what does this all mean for Diaz in the days following the victory? The Allied Supreme Commander, General Ferdinand Foch, starts putting immense pressure on Diaz. He looks at the retreating, bleeding Austro-Hungarian army and tells Diaz to go on the offensive immediately.
Right, chase them down.
He wants Diaz to chase them, to crush the empire right then and there. But Diaz pushes back, doesn't he?
He does, and it shows incredible, almost unprecedented leadership discipline. He refuses.
Wow.
Diaz recognizes a fundamental truth about the system he just built. The very thing that won him the battle, that scattered, decentralized, flexible net defense, where small units operated independently, made an immediate, coordinated, massive offensive practically impossible.
Because they aren't lined up anymore.
Exactly. His formations were too mixed up to just magically turn around, form a neat line, and march forward as a unified wall.
Plus, Diaz is a realist. He looks at the battlefield and realizes that if his army chases the Austro-Hungarians, the Italians will now have to cross that exact same swollen Piave River.
Into the exact same trap.
Right. They'd face the exact same logistical nightmares, the broken bridges, the flooded banks that just annihilated the enemy. It takes a lot of nerve to look at your boss, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, and say no because you understand your own operational limits better than they do.
It's a brilliant example of knowing when not to attack. He didn't let the euphoria of victory or the immense external pressure push him into a disastrous mistake. He opted for limited actions to gain better starting positions rather than risking his newly saved army on a reckless charge.
And his restraint pays off because the macro effects of the Second Battle of the Piave River do the work for him. This was Austria-Hungary's last great military offensive.
The very last one.
The failure was so complete and the loss of life so massive that it struck a fatal blow to the army's morale and cohesion. It had massive political repercussions throughout the war-weary empire. It essentially foretold the complete internal collapse of the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was finally finished off at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto just 4 months later.
The ripple effects hit Germany just as hard. The Germans had desperately hoped that a victory in Italy would knock Italy out of the war, allowing them to access the resources of the affluent Po Valley, and more importantly, letting them shift all their forces to the Western Front to deal with the arriving American troops.
But that didn't happen.
No. When the news of the Piave River defeat reached German General Erich Ludendorff, he bluntly stated that he had the sensation of defeat for the first time.
It was the turning point, the beginning of the end. Now, before we wrap up, what blows my mind is how this one battle rippled into the art and culture we still consume today.
Yes.
Because an event this massive leaves a deep footprint, and I want to reward your curiosity with some of these connections from our source. For instance, there are 2 famous pieces of graffiti left by Italian soldiers on the broken walls of destroyed rural houses that are still remembered today.
I love this detail.
One translates to, "It is better to live one single day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep," and the other, "Everyone a hero. Either we hold the Piave or let all of us get killed." Those actual pieces of wall are still preserved today in a military shrine.
It captures the absolute desperation and the psychological resolve of the Italian troops holding that line. It's not just a battle cry, it's a testament to people who believe they had nowhere else to fall back to.
And it wasn't just the soldiers on the ground documenting this. The alternate name for this fight, the Battle of the Solstice, was actually coined by the famous Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio. In August of 1918, he actually conducted a flight over Vienna with 11 airplanes, but instead of dropping bombs, he dropped thousands of leaflets from the sky praising the Italian victory.
It's a very early, very literal form of psychological warfare, almost like dropping a victory tweet directly onto your opponent's timeline. He understood that the narrative of the battle was almost as important as the physical victory itself.
Exactly. And speaking of narrative, here is a wild connection for you. During the shelling and firefights that continued into July, an 18-year-old American ambulance driver was severely wounded by an Austrian mortar on July 8th. He was knocked unconscious, taking shrapnel to his legs.
Oh, this is the Hemingway connection.
Yes. That teenager was Ernest Hemingway. The event inspired his legendary novel, A Farewell to Arms. In the 1932 film adaptation, Gary Cooper's character is wounded in the leg at this very battle.
It's incredible how these massive historical events intersect with the lives of individuals who go on to shape our cultural landscape. Hemingway's entire literary voice, that sparse, gritty realism, was forged in the aftermath of the Piave River.
It really is. And the battle still appears in modern media. It's mentioned in Andre Axelman's novel Call Me By Your Name and its film adaptation, featuring a scene at a memorial for the victims in the city of Pendino. There's a video game called Isanso that features maps based on the battle. Even Pope Francis mentioned in an interview that his grandfather participated in an experience on the Piave River during the war. It's a story that echoes through generations.
It echoes because the themes are so deeply universal. We're looking at a story of utter failure at Caporetto, leading to an honest reckoning and resulting in a triumphant reinvention.
Yeah.
General Diaz let go of rigid, outdated traditions. He stopped trying to micromanage every single trench and instead embraced decentralized movement and trust. And by doing so, he quite literally saved a nation.
It's such a powerful takeaway for you, taking the rulebook, throwing it out, and finding a better way to operate when everything is on the line.
This raises an important question, though, and it's something I want you to mull over as you go about your day. Think about General Diaz's Central Reserve, those 13 divisions, and crucially, those 6,000 trucks.
Right.
We often look at technology, like a massive fleet of vehicles, simply as tools for speed or logistics. A way to get things from point A to point B faster. But what if the true value of introducing new technology into a system isn't just about speed? What if technology is actually an enabler of trust?
I really like that.
Having those 6,000 trucks meant Diaz finally had the infrastructure required to safely give his frontline people the autonomy to make their own decisions. He could trust them to act independently because the technology ensured he could back them up if things went wrong. So look at your own life. Where could a new tool or a new system finally allow you to let go of control and truly trust the people around you?
That is a brilliant lens to look through. Not just tools for speed, but tools to build trust and autonomy. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you pulled some valuable insights out of the trenches of history today. Stay curious, keep questioning the rulebooks in your own life, and keep exploring. We'll catch you on the next one.